So what is needed in Kenya today is stability. Kabila langu ni Kenya.
He was once dismissed as nothing more than a passing cloud.
Na asante, salimia jamii yako na wote.
A fleeting figure destined to vanish without leaving a mark.
And you see that time also, not all the college supported him.
Niweke maneno yao, vitendo vyao, matakwa yao mbele.
Moi will not go to the Rift Valley without the express permission from the provincial commissioner, Isaiah Matenga then. And you are vice president.
But when Daniel Moi rose to the presidency in 1978, he shattered every doubt.
So one of the things he did is to make sure that he recruited a lot of KANU chairmen. So he got to every place, the KANU chairman is a Moi person.
Nasimama kama vile
a man and a character who holds both providential lack and marginalization by the leaders.
Thank you.
For 24 years, Moi's presence loomed over Kenya, his grip firm, his gaze ever watchful. How did a humble school teacher ascend to the pinnacle of power, becoming Kenya's longest serving president?
Kwa sababu mimi nasema greatness of a nation is not its size or population. It is greatness of the heart. Mkumbukeni wale ambao tunajua hawana.
To some, he was the great stabilizer, a steady hand that held the nation together through storms of uncertainty. To others, he was a shadow of fear, an autocrat who silenced voices, crushed opposition, and ruled through intimidation. This is the story of Daniel Arap Moi, the man once destined for obscurity, yet who reigned longer than any other in Kenya's history.
Ni wajibu wetu kama iko shida kwa shule fulani, tufanye harambee. Wanaeleza uvumi, atasema Moi mgonjwa wapi, kuja hapa. 50,000 kwa mkuu wa mkoa wa elimu. I love Kenyans. I know they respect me, they help me. Mimi Daniel Arap Moi naapa kwamba nitakuwa mwaminifu kwa Jamhuri ya Kenya.
At over 6 feet tall, Daniel Arap Moi carried himself with a deliberate, upright stride.
You interacted with him. I had a chance to interact with him when he was president and when he was out. He's such a sophisticated man. You leave his office or his house thinking that he's the only gentleman still standing.
Clad in dark, finely tailored suits, crisp white shirts, and perfectly knotted ties, he radiated composure and authority. For 24 years, his presence became inseparable from his signature look. Suits accented at times by a single red rose on his lapel and the ceremonial rungu firmly in hand.
Up to the time he went to the grave, he stood straight. He had his white teeth intact. Hello? Until he started having more head than hair, like I'm doing. You know, he had his nice black hair. You get that? Which was graying graciously at some point. And he could march like a policeman who missed a chance to go to the training. He's the only Kenyan president who will actually march with the beat of the band.
Together, they created an unmistakable image of command and reverence.
Na mnauliza nyinyi nyote kukaa na mimi, tuende barabara yetu tukiwa KANU pamoja.
Moi was a very dominant president and he literally controlled KANU. People were scared of speaking out.
But Moi's story did not begin in the corridors of power. It began far away in the rugged hills of Baringo.
When all is said and done, Moi was a creator and a creation of his times.
In the quiet village of Cordial, such a location, he was born on September 2nd, 1924, at a time when Kenya was still under British colonial rule. He was the fifth child of Gabon, the senior wife of Daniel Arap Moi. His name, Toroitich, welcome home the cattle, reflected the central role of livestock in his Tugen community. Some say the name Moi evolved from Kimoi, his father's name, Kikuyu Arap Moi, a herdsman of the Soti clan that settled among the Tugen Hills. When his father passed in 1928, Moi was only 4 years old. It was his elder brother Tuitok who became his guardian. Like countless boys of his generation, Moi spent his childhood tending the family's herds, but Tuitok recognized something more in him and sent the young boy to school.
The big brother becomes the father, and the others are looking up to him. So it was very good of the big brother to do the right thing. The decision to take the young man to school was a very wise one. And the young man wanted to be in school.
That single decision will chart the course of Moi's destiny.
And the schools, not many people are going to school.
He's born at a time the Kenyan Africans were going through some kind of transition. Kenya was increasingly getting in contact with the outside world. The area where Moi emerges had started witnessing caravan merchants trespassing from the coast, through that area. And believe you me, a town called Ravine is one of the oldest towns, if not in Kenya, in the Rift Valley. On the heels of the caravan merchants were, of course, Christian missionaries who were the vanguards of imperial designs in Kenya. The flag followed the cross. The political administrators followed the missionaries. The missionaries literally made the way for the politicians and administrators of colonialism.
In 1934, a young boy set foot in the newly founded African Inland Mission School in Kabartonjo, an institution that will soon relocate to Kapsabet.
Moi begins his life as a traditional boy, a herdsboy, for his father's goats. That area normally is good for keeping goats. And also started to begin to have a taste of colonial modernity in the form of Christianity and some kind of education.
Within its walls, he shone with rare brilliance. A natural leader and gifted athlete, he rose to become both prefect and captain of the football team.
That now left him at the mercy of seeing Christian missionaries as more helpers than just trying to change him and take him to heaven. That is how Moi started getting an education and friendship of the African inland Christian missionaries. He goes to school, gets an education, relocates to Kapsabet. That's why Kapsabet has produced the highest number of presidents in this country. I don't know whether you know that. Today, Kapsabet High School, the boys' high school, that is where Moi used to be. It has produced 2 presidents and 2 vice presidents, Moi himself and Dr. William Kipchirchir Ruto.
In the 1930s, you know, young people going to school and they stand out. The son of so-and-so is in this class or is among these people. So Moi was unique as a young man because he went to school. When some of his age mates were maybe running after cattle or doing whatever it is that they were doing, or looking tough with some other things.
Being warriors.
Yeah,
Warriors.
he went to school and therefore he stood out.
By 1946, chalk and chalkboard became his tools of service. And in 1949, after a rigorous short course at Kagumo Teachers College, he was promoted to the rank of P2, returning to Tambach to inspire anew.
He turned out not to be a bad teacher. And he was a good calculator.
You know, that was out of this world. Because of the colonial architecture, there is the extent to which an African could rise. And they were assistant teachers. Actually, they were not full teachers. You know, in the early 20s and the early, even the 30s, even up to the 40s, there was something called bush schools. Samastun, literally. And then there were sector schools. These sector schools were an improvement of bush schools. You know, that's now when you went to secondary schools. Fundamentally, if you look at that narrative, Moi was a creation of his environment. These are not choices that he really made, but this is an environment that has beginning trappings of Christianity, Western education, Christian converts. You get that, you know, new schools coming in. Moi had nothing to do with the establishment of Kapsabet or the early schools that he went to. And he ended up in Tengecha colleges, you know. Those are, you know, environments that were created by a colonial situation and gave African opportunities for upward mobility, however slow it was.
When he was growing up, who is it that had the power? The missionaries, eh? They ran the schools, eh? And the churches, eh? And even hospitals, eh? So he imbibed. So I said that he knew which side of the bread is buttered. Yeah. And it was very well buttered on the missionary side, eh?
He taught with devotion at Tambach until 1955, when the course of his life shifted forever. Called forth by history, he was elected to the Legislative Council as Rift Valley's African voice, stepping onto the grand stage of politics with courage and conviction.
The missionaries were key in you know, guiding the colonial government of what needed to be done or what needed not to be done. You could imagine, until they elect an African to the Legislative Council in 1948, Africans in the LegCo, the short form of the Legislative Council, were represented by a missionary. That tells you that Christianity and imperialism were one and the same thing, were actually two sides of the same coin.
Well, he did not know that the opportunity was going to arise when it arose. But as to whether he had ambitions, that's a different matter. It's plausible. Because he turned out to be a friend of Moses Mudavadi, the father of Wycliffe, yeah. Who was an education officer in those areas at the time. So as an education officer, he went around and he knew his teachers, eh? And he knew the ones that are seemingly looking good, eh? And especially if they are unique, not being many, eh? And how many Tugans were teachers at that time.
Moi emerges as the favorite of the missionaries. And nobody has said this, but I would believe, other than the political dynamics, other than the idea that he had the right thing at the right place, he also had the right connections, particularly with the Christian missionaries. Moi is a friend, until he died, he was a friend of the Penat family, the people who Kapranet is named after.
Now, what happened in 1955? There was another person who represented the Africans in that region. Yeah. I think his name was Tamen or something like that. I think he was a Maasai. And there were rumors that he liked his drink. And, that sometimes he probably would misbehave when he had enjoyed. And so the theory or the rumor was that the colonial government became unhappy with him. So he needed to be changed to get a sober African, somebody who is likely to say good things and not embarrass the logical. And because there was need to change, and Mudavadi being a very influential native as an education officer, so he gets a chance to recommend people. So he recommends this fellow who might have been his friend.
The factor that very few people have talked about is his influence within the Christian and missionary setup that clearly showed him as less harmful than many others who were more educated probably than him. Dr. Taita Towet, although slightly younger, and many others were there. You get that? Yeah. So Moi was seen as harmless, very obedient, and very subservient to the demands of colonial modernity. If you see him in those days, he's among the very few people, very nicely cut suit. Yeah. And he had the stature, tall, dark, and handsome. That was His Excellency. He's the only leader who only married one wife, officially, and died with one wife, officially. And I'm using the word officially very strongly. Yes, don't ask me why. Yes. So in fact, look at people of his generation. They were serious polygamists.
He was appointed in 1955. But in the election of 1957, he was elected. Now, in that election, and Mudavadi was one of the registrars of the voters. So he went to everywhere in the Rift Valley, telling people, giving people votes, and telling them to vote for Tory teacher. And they are wondering, well, what is this? I said, just take it and go and vote for Tory teacher.
Do Tory teach.
Yeah.
Some of them didn't know even who a Tory teach was.
No, they just told vote for Tory teacher.
So Mudavadi had a lot of influence.
Yeah, he was in charge of the whole province in terms of education.
It is true that Moi had a close bond with the British. They had identified him earlier, partially because of an image that he had of an easily marriable character that you can turn into what you want. Very obedient, very subservient. Somebody very a strict Christian, a stickler to time.
So the people who were allowed to vote at that time were people who were pro-British?
Together voted itself, especially in the Kikuyu zone. You had to prove that you had campaigned against the Mau Mau in order to get a vote. So you can imagine that those who got votes were home guys, most of them.
Those of you are home guys.
And they were getting more than one vote, 2 or 3 depending on your status. If for any reason you should be suspected of sympathizing with the Mau Mau or those other people, no vote for you. You cannot be a candidate, and you cannot be a candidate or a voter.
As the winds of independence swept across Kenya, unity gave way to political fault lines. The Kenya African National Union, KANU, under the charismatic Jomo Kenyatta, rose to dominate the stage. But Daniel Arap Moi and others envisioned a different future. In 1960, Moi helped found the Kenya African Democratic Union, KADU.
The idea that the dominant ethnic groups will not be good for the country, the Kikuyu and the Luo alliance, was a British idea. It was actually being driven by the white settlers who wanted to maintain their interests in the country.
The settlers who had been told their future is doomed as rulers rebaptized themselves as a small white tribe. So they were willing to say they are now a tribe. Eh? A small one, eh?
A small minority.
Yeah.
And for them, Jaramogi from the Luo community and the Kenyatta from the Kikuyu community could be too dangerous if they are not tamed.
So they went around looking for other small tribes to gang up against what was to be portrayed as the two big bad tribes.
This is the Luo.
Because of Jaramogi and Boya.
Then Kikuyu.
Because of the Mau Mau War. So these are the bad ones. Eh? The rest are good people.
They found these two leaders at the top, Kenyatta and Jaramogi. One was rumored to have inclinations to the east, the socialist. Kenyatta was also accused of having visited Russia when he was. But they also saw credentials of him being a pragmatist in Kenyatta. Said, well, that way will be a lesser evil. But Moi is no evil for us. So let's support him. Let's form KANU-KADU.
And somehow they managed to convince a lot of some interesting leaders. Eh? So Moi quit being in KANU and he went to become chairman of KADU. Ngala quit. I think his post was maybe treasurer or something like that, but a high position. Eh? And he went to become the leader of KADU. Eh? Muliro, whatever. And you know, the Luya are very many. Eh?
Second in population.
Yeah, so how they were convinced that they are small is another matter.
What the British needed is somebody with enough empty mind and enough loyalty and enough subservience to play their game. And in that cycle, there was none other than Dan.
And in terms of logic, it was a very good logic, in hindsight. Eh? Because the idea was when the elections come, and you have all these others uniting against these two, there's no way they can win. No way can Luos and the Kikuyus win when everybody else is against them. No way.
At its heart was Majimbo, a federal vision of government, one that promised regional autonomy and a safeguard against the marginalization of any community.
That the constitution has not yet been implemented, and they are discussing independence constitution. How on earth that an internal self-government constitution is which is being agreed, is set aside and wanting to implement another constitution, a different constitution?
Now, when the elections were held in February 1961, something came out very clearly. Because the voters elected KANU across the board, and that was a shock. What the voters knew KANU to be the one fighting for independence. And KADU appeared like a puppet of the settlers. The KANU people made a mistake because they had been told no Kenyatta and they were there talking about what? Kenyatta. Eh? So you want Kenyatta out. We are not going to form a government unless Kenyatta is out. So they can say, you people, what? Okay, you wait. Ngala, do you want to run something? So what people talk about Ngala's government, that's how it came up, because the KANU people refused to form government. And became a big lesson,
From the security viewpoint, I think that Jomo Kenyatta's return to political life in Kenya at the present time would be a disaster. I repeat and confirm that in my view, Jomo Kenyatta's release would be at present a danger to security. The decision is mine. By this statement, I wish to make it clear that accordingly he will remain under restriction.
On August the 14th, 1961, Kenyatta came home.
So many people came because the news just spread out like wildfire. And Mzee tried to speak to them. And I remember his first few words. He said, I am very happy to be back with you, my people.
When do you want independence for Kenya? Today. What means are you ready to adopt to achieve independence?
Constitutional means.
And do you condemn Mau Mau violence and oath-taking?
Well, I have never approved of any violence at all. My leadership has not been to darkness and death, but to light and prosperity.
We must show the world that some of them has been wrong, that some of them have misunderstood us, and it's only by our action they will know that we mean business. Brothers, I think I have spoken enough in this language. It is not my wish that I should be speaking to you in a foreign, and for that matter, in colonialistic language.
The 1960s opened with high-stakes negotiations thousands of miles away. At the Lancaster House conferences in London, Kenya's destiny was debated and defined. Moi stood there representing KADU, pressing for African rights, access to fertile lands once locked away by European settlers, and a stronger African hand in shaping the nation's governance. By 1961, his influence was unmistakable. As KADU's parliamentary secretary and later as minister in the pre-independence coalition, Moi's star continued to rise.
Now, in the second Lancaster House conference in 1962, again, the people who are supposed to participate should be leaders who are recognized by being in the legico. Kenyatta had come out of jail. He had been released. None of the political prisoners was a member of the Legislative Council, and therefore they could not attend. Now, the people in KANU, many of them had committed or promised that when Kenyatta comes out, we shall step down for him. It turns out that we are not very interested in honoring the pledges. Except one person, Kariuki Njiri, the son of Chief Kariuki Njiri. So he's stepping down so that Kenyatta can become an MP. A member of the legislature. So that's how Kenyatta ended up participating in the 1962 Lancaster Conference. And in that conference, KANU as an organ was a minority. British were against them. The colonial government in Kenya was against them. KADU, and then all the other groups there. So it was a minority. And the British government was determined to impose the pet subject that had come up, Majimbo. So as much as they argued, they were not being listened to on the problem with Majimbo. So it was imposed.
The function of the conference is not, of course, to take decisions about the future of Kenya. That is a responsibility which ultimately rests with Her Majesty's government as a whole. And it is my duty as Secretary of State to make recommendations and give advice to my colleagues about what should be done. We shall, in effect, be discussing the foundations which must be laid for eventual self-government.
Don't let it happen to Dennis! Don't let what happened to me yesterday happen to Dennis!
May 1963, the last elections under British rule. KANU swept the polls, carrying Kenya into independence. On December 12th, 1963, after the final Lancaster House conference, the flag of a new nation was hoisted. Jomo Kenyatta became Prime Minister, head of government, under a constitution that still placed Queen Elizabeth as head of state. A year later, Kenya declared itself a republic. Kenyatta assumed the presidency. Uniting the roles of head of state and government. But the political ground shifted once more. In 1964, KADU dissolved into KANU. Moi too joined the fold, aligning with Kenyatta's government. The merger, encouraged by British hands, sought to weaken the growing influence of Oginga Odinga in the fragile young republic.
When Kenyatta comes in, and the British begin to realize he's dancing to the tune of the West. After all, he was not very Igbo. Kenyatta, knew good life when one appeared. Yeah. And the only problem he had with the colonialists is because they discriminated against him. When he was in control, sitting in the governor's mansion, where the governor used to sit, and walking around and everybody saluting and calling him a muzee, things were okay. His problem is that when he was not in charge and when he was discriminated. So he became a good darling of Washington and London. That's why Kenya became the only country that tacitly supported apartheid, with Njonjo, with his connections with South Africa, to the juggling of the frontline states like Tanzania, Nyerere, the firebrand against apartheid and against the capitalists.
Kwa Matungi, KANU, Machakos, nchi yako. Kenyatta, Kenyatta.
Ni kazi ya kila mwananchi kuinua nchi yetu, na serikali yenu tukufu itajaribu iwezavyo kuwasaidisha wananchi.
With KADU out of the way, the differences within KANU came up. And the issue was the direction that the country should take now that it is independent. That's what the difference was.
Jaramogi became a victim of the ideological war of East-West during the Cold War.
Jaramogi and Murumbi and others were thinking we should balance up this a little bit. But Kenyatta said, no, we need to be with the West. And the first ambassadors and high commissioners that were appointed, there was that attempted balance. Because you had three going to the West, Bonn, London, and New York. Then on the other side, you have Moscow, Beijing, and Cairo. Balance.
This powerful nation, the Western countries were led by the Americans, and the Eastern countries by the Soviet Union, and now China, sort of forced the world to be in two groups, so you had to be with one or the other. But Kenya had declared that we were non-aligned. And those are the instructions for us as ambassadors. That's what we explained. But meanwhile, their ambassadors were busy in the host capitals. Like here, we had a very active American ambassador called William Atwood. Very, very busy. They were busy working on our politicians, on our ministers, you know. So they created a local conflict. The Chinese were also very active. The Russians were very active. So instead of KANU remaining solid, now the president found himself being supported by two groups that were equally strong. So Tom Mboya came to be known, and even the parliament became divided.
Those same colonial, forces, but now together with people from within KANU and outside KANU.
But when it came to the serious reality, which was enunciated properly in session of paper number 10 of 1965, which Kenyatta simply asked Mboya and company to come up with a document. But some people were talking about socialism all the time, so call it socialism. But it has nothing to do with socialism. So they came up with Mboya, Kibaki, and an American professor called Edwards from Rice University. They helped craft a document which essentially put Kenya in the Western camp and made it clear that Kenya was a capitalist country. Kenyatta told people to stop talking about socialism. They did not. They continued. And it became then the next thing that comes into the picture very well is essentially the politics of Kenyatta's death. In the West and other The question is, who would succeed? Is it Mboya or is it Odinga? And both of them were, in case the guy goes, who takes over?
And if you look at the portfolio Jaramogi had at that time of independence, it was a very powerful portfolio he had. He was in charge of home affairs, which meant what is now internal security. And of course, the chemistry between the two leaders, you know, both from Kenyatta's perspective and from Jaramogi's perspective, things were going to fall naturally into play.
If you look at the 1964 Republican Constitution on the question of succession, it made it clear that if it happens, there is a vacancy, the sitting vice president will not automatically ascend to the position. It will depend on the persuasion in the cabinet and in parliament. And who was to be the vice president? Jaramogi. That meant Jaramogi is out, in case it happens. And who was likely to be the one? Who was the person who could persuade people, had the language and all those things, was Mboya, and seemed to have a little money, extra. So that Mboya, he was the Minister of Constitutional Affairs, so he crafted the thing for himself. And that's the way it was. Now, when Jaramogi resigned in 1966, after being pushed, Mboya actually said we pushed him. So Jaramogi was saying, I've resigned on principle. And Mboya said, the guy was pushing. The question was, who then replaces Jaramogi? Kenyatta settled on another prima donna, Murumbi.
Murumbi comes in more because of his weaknesses as opposed to his strengths. Murumbi was kind of a child of nobody knew. He was a child of a Muindi, an Indian, and a Maasai lady. But clearly, he didn't have traceable origins. You cannot associate him. He tried to play Maasai, Gagata, even went both land, which I'm told now the president has taken over, in Narok. But it didn't work. He ended up being buried here at a cemetery in Pangani. Otherwise, he could have buried, if he was through Maasai, he could have buried, his soul could be resting in his homeland. That is actually the weakness that qualified him, because Kenyatta did not need another Jaramogi who has a strong community supporting, literally fanatical about him. That was a threat.
And Murumbi did not last 1 year. Remember, he had those ideas that Mau Mau was not a very bad thing, and as Minister of Foreign, you base your foreign policy on the Mau Mau legacy. Not the sort of thing that the West wants to hear. Particularly the Western point man in the government, one of the point men called Charles Njonjo. He didn't like Joe very much. So within a year, Murumbi had resigned, or pushed, whichever sounds better. And when he was leaving, he wrote a letter of resignation, a very nice letter, polite like a gentleman. And Kenyatta, as a gentleman, replied to him in a very nice way. How he's got to. But the message is, okay, I accept your resignation reluctantly. And there was Njonjo on the sideline telling Joe, you are finished, Joe, you are finished. So there was a vacancy for the what? For the vice president.
To succeed Murumbi, they needed another weak person. And the weaknesses they were looking for is weaknesses of character and weaknesses of community of origin.
And then who is in a position to take over the job? Moi.
And Moi qualified in both. Tugen. In fact, many people do not, even up to today, you tell them Tugen, they know Kalenjin. Yeah. But Kalenjin is this amorphous thing.
Tangu za makamu wa rais, na kwa wakati wote nitamshauri kwa hekima na uaminifu rais.
They say that Njonjo had an influence in Kenyatta speaking Moi.
Njonjo and Moi were both very friendly and promoted by the British. They had that in common.
Na kutingiza, hapana simama. Tingiza. Choma. Choma.
Shamtema kuni. Shamtema kuni. Asialie na masikio asikie. Aliye masikio asikie.
He told me that whenever Jomo Kenyatta travels to the Rift Valley for his working tour, I may not know. When you announce about his itinerary, just put down there that at the same time, the Vice President and Minister for Home Affairs, Daniel Arap Moi, has asked the people of Rift Valley to receive Mr. Jomo Kenyatta, give him a thunderous welcome as soon as he steps on the soil of the Rift Valley. That is at Mai Mahiu.
Ni wajibu wetu kama iko shida kwa shule fulani, tufanye harambee.
Together now, yeah, building the nation now.
These things could be facilitated if roads, rails exist.
Mzee, nitawaambia sasa hivi. Asante sana mzee. Na vivyo hivyo Mungu asifiwe.
This moment marked a decisive turning point in Moi's climb, placing him directly beside President Jomo Kenyatta.
I sat down there.
And subtly branding him as a future contender for the highest office in the land.
The third qualification that Moi had, which Murumbi didn't have, is the strong British and later on American support. The Americans supported Moi when they realized that Kenyatta meant no harm. Kenyatta is an old man who needed his whiskey and ribs of a goat. He confirmed that family when he allowed, Operation Thunderbolt to be coordinated from Nairobi. You remember Operation Thunderbolt? Entebbe raided by the Israelis with the knowledge of Kenyatta. They gave them safe landing here. That's when the Americans said, this is our boy.
See, the British put him in the Legico. And in the Legico, he was busy saying good things about them. Eh? And he was among the first to jump from KANU into KADU, which was a settler thing. Eh? He never left that attachment. It was never. And as I just pointed out, you have the new Kenyatta government. He's trying very hard to be seen to be friendly to the West.
Yeah.
Not just to be seen, they actually were friendly to the West for different reasons. Okay? Now, part of that friendship is to have people who are friends of the British.
As vice president, Moi emerges at a point where Kikuyu subnationalism, I call it sub because I have the nation in mind, subnationalism was at its highest around the presidency. There were members of Kenyatta administration who were very much aware that Kenyatta's life was actually not going to be there forever. Every day that came, they began to realize that Mzee was becoming weak. And they thought, we have now learned that the presidency is actually the pathway to all you need to be rich, to be stable, and to be secure, both as a community and as individuals. We can't let this go. So there started a struggle within the inner circle of Kenyatta's followers, supporters, elite group. And that is the struggle that did not make Moi life easy and also enabled him to survive. His life was not very easy, but enabled him to survive.
What do we see then? In 2 years, what did we see? There was a serious change of the constitution in 1968. When they introduced detention without trial, you have to be a member of a party to be elected anything. You cannot be an independent candidate. KPU was there. It was there. But KANU had the majority, so they ran through things. KPU will be banned a year later for different reasons. Yeah. But the passage of the amendments, draconian ones, were in 1968. And to make matters worse, they appeared to be aimed at Tom Mboya.
The brilliant and charismatic minister whose shadow loomed over Kenyatta's government. Mboya, it was feared, could claim power should the presidency suddenly fall vacant.
Remember Mboya's clause? If there is a succession,
any member of the cabinet.
Yeah, they can do it. They changed that. And they said, should there be a vacancy, the sitting vice president will be acting president for 3 months. So that Mboya thing, out.
And that laid the ground and the foundation that Moi will step and emerge, at first very weak, and then much more stronger.
A shrewd recalibration of the political chessboard that introduced the controversial 90 days rule.
Somebody should take care of the government while they are figuring out what to do. And it should be clear, the line of succession, not to second guess here and there. So that's why I say you have an election in 3 months so that those who want a job can campaign at the time, but not when you are mourning.
Yet, even with the law reshaped, Moi's path to power was anything but smooth.
Yeah, there are people who thought they could replace him, or do what was done to Tom Mboya and Odinga. So Odinga was sidelined. Mboya helped to sideline Odinga with that constitutional thing and then some other things. The Town Court Amendment, Mboya's work. And then in 68, because it appeared as if Kenyatta may be a goner, supposedly had a heart attack or something. So that's why there was a frenzy to get things quickly. Kenyatta refused to die at the time, but the amendments were put in place. So what remained were now the future.
KANU imekwisha shinda kabisa na kuonyesha ulimwengu mzima kwamba KANU ndiyo inatawala nchi hii ya Kenya. Pana ingine.
You worked for 2 presidents, Mzee Jomo Kenyatta.
Yes.
And Daniel Arap Moi.
Yes.
But for the longest period, you worked for Daniel Arap Moi.
Yes. 24 years, 4 months, 8 days.
When did you first meet this Kenya's second president?
In 1977.
Mm-hmm.
When I was posted from Kakamega, where I was working in the Provincial Information Office, to State House to the Jomo Kenyatta's press officer. Somehow, Moi noticed that I was a good writer and I was doing a good job for Kenyatta.
Oh, KANU yajenga nchi.
Mimi niko na uwezo, na mimi kama najua rafiki yangu mimi niko na uwezo. Ndio, mimi niko na uwezo, na mimi nitatumia uwezo wangu kwa njia nzuri. Kama kwa njia kutupa mawe pale njiani, njia nzuri. Tutafute chakula ya wananchi.
KANU yajenga nchi. KANU
tutafute dawa nzuri ya kuwapa watu wetu kama hospitali hii ambao wanataka kuiharibu. Tutafute dawa nzuri ya kuwatibu.
Linjiru, who would later become Moi's close aide, recalls their first encounters with striking clarity.
At that time, some forces within the government establishment, mostly Kikuyus, people from the Gema community, felt that Moi should not ascend to the presidency when Mr. Jomo Kenyatta died.
The Kiambu Mafia.
The Kiambu Mafia. Well, not necessarily Kiambu Mafia, because some of them were not from Kiambu. Paul Ongei was not from Kiambu. Angaine was not from Kiambu. So it was a cabal of people who did not like Moi. And Moi knew I was not a Kikuyu. So he called me. And it was 1977. So I went to see him. We discussed many issues of mutual interest. But then he told me that whenever Jomo Kenyatta travels to the Rift Valley for his working tour, I may not know. When you announce about his itinerary, just put down there that at the same time, the Vice President and Minister for Home Affairs, Daniel Arap Moi, has asked the people of Rift Valley to receive Mr. Jomo Kenyatta, give him a thunderous welcome as soon as he steps on the soil of the Rift Valley. That is at Mai. Yeah, so we agreed, and of course I would brief him on the ongoing.
Moi fitted in very well.
Sasa hivi mzee, mzee, nitawaambia sasa hivi. Asante sana mzee. Na vivyo hivyo, Mungu asifiwe. Kabisa mzee.
His loyalty was to Kenyatta, if not somewhere else. And even if it was somewhere else, it was primarily to Kenyatta, because he was the government.
Vice President, please inform His Excellency the President that he has been nominated as the only candidate for the presidency.
Kabisa. Sasa hivi mzee.
When you started working closely with Mzee Jomo Kenyatta and Daniel Arap Moi,
yes,
how was their relationship?
It was very cordial. Even Jomo Kenyatta would help Moi with money for campaigns. Yes, although he was not giving him more than 10,000 shillings. Yeah.
But those days,
it was a lot, but he should have given him more.
To step into Kenyatta's shoes, he endured humiliation and at times even physical intimidation at the hands of powerful rivals who hovered close to the president.
During that time, Moi would not go to the Rift Valley without the express permission from the provincial commissioner, Isaiah Mathenga then. And you are the vice president. You are answerable to the provincial commission, and you are the vice president. There was a time Moi was in Uganda representing the president in a Commonwealth meeting, and there's a group of security officers who went to his house in Kabarak and turned it upside down as they are checking, still looking for weapons. And you are still there, Vice President. You come back, you don't ask. You keep quiet as if nothing happened. That was the strength of Moi.
Moi knew his strength was to pretend to be weak. And by the way, Moi told me that pretending to be weak, pretending to be foolish, is a five tactic, and it works.
Still, Njiru insists Moi turned his unflinching loyalty into his greatest weapon.
Moi knew his position very well. And his relationship with his boss was good, and he wanted to remain good.
His devotion to Kenyatta, open, unquestioning, and absolute.
So that ability to project loyalty to whoever is in charge at any time was ingrained in him. Could also be part of his political calculations. Because being seen far, if you don't rock the boat, the chances of succeeding are very high. So when he was appointed as vice president, and people doubted whether he had any ambitions, which he hid. He had ambitions, but he hid them very well by being loyal, appearing to be loyal. It came to a point where Kenyatta had decided that it was going to be Moi when he leaves. I heard that from Njoroge Mungai.
You remember I said in the very beginning that His Excellency Dan was a creator and a creation of his times. He knew very well that you cannot change what happens to you from others, but you can change what happens to them from you. He responded using what we call in political strategy, tactical silence.
When Jomo Kenyatta was in power, and Moi was the vice president, Moi acted timidly. He was loyal, he was timid, and he was non-controversial.
And his thinking, which he expressed in 1984 when he was president, and he was returning from some place, and at the airport, as usual, the vice president is there, and the ministers lining up to say, Karibu. For some reason, he was unhappy with Kibaki. So he just turned to him and read the riot act on him. Told him to stop thinking. Because thinking is a presidential prerogative. And he said that when he was vice president, he did not have a mind of his own. Therefore, who are you? He said, you can have a mind. Utaimba, I put a full stop, you put a full stop.
Moi was not the archetypal political gladiator. He was soft-spoken, unassuming, even gentle, non-competitive, non-aggressive. Yet, as Njiru reflects, destiny seemed to whisper that he was bound for something greater.
And you see that time also, not all the college supported him. There were people like Taita Towet, who had gone to Makerere and Britain. He thought that he should have been the leader of the college. By dint of his, by dint of his good educational grounding, there were people like Jean Marie Saroni, who was an MP for Tinderet. He was a lawyer. He understood it in India. So he thought, I'm a lawyer. This one is a graduate of Makerere and United Kingdom. We come from the biggest communities, the Kipsigis and the Nandi. With this Tugen, who never even went to secondary school, just a mere teacher.
Ladies and gentlemen, Haram Bey! Yeah! Haram Bey! Yeah! Haram Bey! Yeah!
As Kenyatta's health waned, the stakes grew perilous. A circle of influential politicians deeply loyal to the aging president conspired feverishly to block Moi's succession.
Of course, there were people who were trying to stop him. Yeah, people like Ijeka Karume, Paul Ongei, Angaine. Yeah, and the team was led by Keheka Kemani.
The father to the governor, our governor, Nakuru. Yeah. I say our governor because I have interests there. Yeah. You know, you cannot be a Kisii like me and you lack interests in Nakuru. That will be almost an abomination. Kika Kimani, Njoroge Mungai, Dr. Kiano, many others of Kenyatta's inner circle.
In smoke-filled rooms, they plotted constitutional changes, desperate to rewind the rules of succession and stop a man they saw as too weak, too humble, and too unlikely from ever taking the mantle of power.
This group had rivals, and their rivals were mainly Charles Njonjo and Mwai Kibaki, the two strongest men in Kenyatta's dispensation. One controlling the money and the other one controlling the law.
For more than a decade, Daniel Arap Moi held the office of vice president, quietly weaving alliances and cultivating friendships within government circles.
Moi, being the clever person that he was, and having been in the parliament longer than anybody else, from 1955, nobody else had served for as long, Yeah. And having seen all those regimes, and survived, And he knew what had happened, what was going on, So one of the things he did is to make sure that he recruited a lot of KANU chairmen. So you go to every place, the KANU chairman is a Moi person. Wherever you go, the chairman is a what? A Moi person. Yeah. So the people who are cooking up these things were kind of short-sighted. They were rising up against a tide. Moi had already secured.
Now, during that time, there was a clause in the Constitution which stated that it was treason to compass, to plot, to plan, and even to imagine the death of a president. And because Njonjo was a friend of Moi, he issued a statement saying that anybody who talks or insinuates about the possible death of the president would be killed. Because that was treason. Just imagining.
Just imagine.
Yes, if the government knew you are imagining, that was treason.
How will the government know that I'm imagining?
Well, they won't know, but of course, that's what to tell you how serious it was.
That was aimed at dealing with Akina Njenga Karume, Akina Kika Kimani, Akina Njoroge Mungai, who were actually for change of the constitution movement, as it is called. You remember the big meeting they had in Nakuru. Nakuru has always been a revolutionary place, particularly when it comes to things KANU. So, these other Lord controlled the money and controlled the law. Njonjo gave the first shot, cut off all those meetings, and influenced the Kenyatta to call these proprietors of this change the constitution movement and tell them, cheni maneno mengi. But they didn't stop there.
There was supposed to be a KANU election or decision making, and the contest was very clear. It was between Moi and Njoroge Mungai. That's the way it was portrayed. And now, the two of them, contestants, decided to consult the president. I heard this from Njoroge Mungai, yes, so I can say it.
Yeah.
So Moi and Njoroge Mungai got in the same car, and they drove all the way to Nakuru to see the president, to ask his advice on guidance, or seek his guidance. At the time when they were there was supposed to be a meeting at KICC that was to deliberate on KANU. So according to Njoroge Mungai, When they got to Nakuru to see them there, they gave impression they were in a hurry. So he offered them zetu uji or tea or whatever it is, you know, the way you welcome people into your house. And they didn't want to take it. So he wondered, what's wrong with these people? And I offer you this, you don't want it. You must be very busy, you're in a hurry. Okay, I understand you have a big meeting in Nairobi, you are very busy. Since you don't want to drink anything, why don't you just go? So they left having no answer from the president. And Joram Mungai said that's when he knew for sure Kenyatta wanted Moi. So maybe he had thought that Kenyatta would go and say the Moi stepper or whatever. He said, no. He just told them to get lost. And when they got to Nairobi, the meeting had been cancelled. Message very clear. Eh?
Then came the night of August 22nd, 1978, a night that forever altered Moi's destiny.
On August 21st, Monday, 1978, Jomo Kenyatta collapsed in Mosambweni primary school in Kwale. Now, from there, he was not rushed to hospital. He was taken to sleep because people thought that if you took him to hospital, it would mean that you are imagining that he might die. And that is why he died the following day, on Tuesday, 22nd August. Because people feared that if you rush him to hospital, you are imagining that he could die. Some people, you know, his handlers left him sleeping. He died alone. Yeah, people, somebody like his brother-in-law, Bioko Inange, who was also his minister of state and a confidant, just flew to Nairobi by Kenya Airways in the evening, and he left Jomo Kenyatta. You know why? Because he don't want to imagine that Kenyatta could die. Somebody like Dr. Mongola, who was his personal physician and the comptroller, they went to Kariba Bar in Toronoka to go and drink. Yeah, he died because imagining was reasonable.
The news reverberated with finality. Mzee Jomo Kenyatta, the founding father of the nation, had passed away earlier that day.
Where was Moi at that particular time?
Moi was in the Kabarak, in Nakuru.
How did he react when he received the news?
Well, I don't know how he reacted because I was in Mombasa with Jomo Kenyatta. I was in Mombasa with Jomo Kenyatta. But of course, he got the message from Mahehu and again from the Director of Intelligence, James Kanyoto. So he rushed to Nairobi. His home was already secured by General Service Unit they had organized.
Hours before, Moi was simply vice president, the loyal second in command. Now, with Attorney General Charles Njonjo safeguarding the Constitution's letter and spirit, the mantle of leadership fell firmly on his shoulders.
Then that day, at 3 p.m., that was on 22nd August 1978, he was sworn in as the president for a period of 3 months.
The family of our father who passed away last night. Vice President, Mr. Daniel Arap Moi, is now President of Kenya for the next 90 days until an election is held for the future president of Kenya.
How is the process of selecting the next candidate, the next president? What happens for that?
So the party will meet and decide which candidate they're going to support.
Does that mean that there's only going to be one candidate, or could there be more?
Well, Kenya is a one-party state, and so the only one candidate.
Yet, even as he assumed power, skepticism filled the air. To some, he was nothing more than a passing cloud, a placeholder destined to vanish as quickly as he had appeared. What they did not foresee was that the next 90 days will forge his resolve and etch his place permanently in Kenya's history. In just 90 days, the constitutional window allowed, Daniel Arap Moi rose to the highest office in the land, sealing his place with a historic uncontested victory in the 1979 elections.
And properly supported in accordance with the Constitution by 1,000 Kenyans, properly registered in various constituencies in all the parts of Kenya.
Nyayo! 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 Nyayo!
Mimi Daniel Arap Moi naapa kwamba nitakuwa mwaminifu kwa Jamhuri ya Kenya.
Since he became president afterwards, he succeeded. People are reminded more about a change the constitution that failed and not change the constitution that succeeded. The 1968 succeeded.
And that is what worked for Moi.
Yeah.
Now that you know how he came to power, the real question is, how did he hold on to it?
Moi relied heavily on the intelligence system. At that time it was called the special branch. Moi relied very heavily on this system.
He goes through an experience between 1982 and 1984 where some people even thought they should kick him out and others thought they should overthrow him. And Moi was able to sustain himself during those 4 or so years. He was a very tough leader, a tough African statesman, and very kind. You know, he believed on the principle of carrot and stick. You either toe the line. If you toe the line, you receive good rewards. You reap rewards. You reap benefits. If you play with him, he told me that anybody plays with me, or anybody who plays with him, would be hit faster than lightning.
Ni wajibu wetu kama iko shida kwa shule fulani, tufanye harambee.
Together now, yeah, building the nation now.
Mimi Daniel Arap Moi naapa kwamba nitakuwa mwaminifu kwa Jamhuri ya Kenya.
Moi's way of running government was eventually he made the final decision himself.
He began by making one thing clear. There was a new sheriff in town.
But 1978 became a very mammoth year for this nation, because you have brought in
into the fray of leadership a man and a character who holds both providential lack and marginalization by the leaders. He combines the two to take a nation, and unfortunately, he goes through an experience between 1982 and 1984 where some people even thought they should kick him out, and others thought they should overthrow him. And Moi was able to sustain himself during those 4 or so years.
Now, with all eyes turned to Kenya's new leader, he strides confidently into the presidency. Wasting no time, Moi seeks to capture the world's attention. Determined to show that a new and energetic hand now steered the nation. He hosts world leaders in Nairobi's Grand Summit and flies to global power centers like the United Kingdom and France, projecting Kenya's rising stature on the international stage.
Perhaps Moi was the weakest of the presidents in the world at the time, power-wise.
Mnasikia mimi mara kwa mara nasema mambo ya ukabila tubilieni mbali. Wananchi wa Kenya kokote wanakoendelea, hiyo ni nchi yao.
At home, Moi rallies his people with the electrifying slogan, Nyayo, Swahili for footsteps, a pledge to follow firmly in the path of his predecessor, Jomo Kenyatta.
Never leave the ivory tower. We must serve those who are less fortunate. Serve them faithfully.
When Moi became president, he had a lot of support. The whole country wanted him to succeed. No doubt about that.
Moi was a very well-informed president. Moi consulted. Moi could even call in on matters of provincial administration. He could call even an assistant chief.
Eager to win the public's trust, Moi cultivates the image of a hands-on president, immersing himself in the everyday lives of ordinary citizens.
Yeah, you're finding some people together as one, pulling together now, yeah, building the nation now.
Hawafikiri environment ambayo wanyama hawa hukaa.
Moi's leadership style soon became apparent. To maintain power, he needed to stay alert and ensure that any potential rivals were kept in check or sidelined. He began by targeting Kenyatta's inner circle, those who opposed him, systematically removing their influence. Moi faced an easy truth. Some of his earliest and most trusted allies harbored ambitions he deemed dangerous. To them, he appeared fragile, an interim caretaker, unlikely to endure.
And then there was a special meeting of heavyweights from the Kikuks. There was Mbio Koinange, representing Kiambu. There was KANU, representing Muranga. And there was Kibaki,
properly supported in accordance with the Constitution,
representing Nyeri, the greater these things. And they went to pledge loyalty to the president. But what stood out was the language they used in pledging what? Loyalty. Kibaki said, "We accept you as the president because it is the right thing to do." But also he had a right there, and don't mess up the economy. KANU say that we accept you because you are the one that Jomo left to us. Koinange spoke in a language that was not English and raised the question of what had been planted. Is it beans or coffee? Now, you know how long beans take to mature? It's 3 months. You can 3 months. Yeah, plant and eat in 3 months. Yeah? Or is it coffee which takes about 5 years before you can harvest anything? So Moi turned to KANU, his friend, and what did the guy say? Because it was not in English, eh? And KANU told Moi, you know, the Kikuyu he spoke is so deep that I also have a problem with it. What he said, yeah? Of course, Moi understood Kikuyu very well. He didn't need someone to tell him. He knew.
Determined to tame rivals and cement central Kenya's loyalty, Moi leaned on a select group of allies. Chief among them was Charles Mugabe Njonjo, the Aben Attorney General who had been instrumental in his ascent to State House. Alongside Njonjo stood Laikipia's Gigi Karuki and Moi's carefully chosen deputy, Nyeri's own Mwai Kibaki, polished, cautious and widely respected.
He had to make Kibaki his vice. He had no choice. It was either Njonjo or Kibaki. But Moi knew Njonjo. Moi knew Njonjo. Because the same group that made him, the British, is the same group that made Njonjo.
Na kwa vyovyote vile sitatoa siri za baraza la mawaziri.
He picked Kibaki, in my view, for 2 reasons. One, Kibaki was fairly elitist, not excited by a lot of power, as long as he had enough of it that can enable him to drink his Tusker, and that's it. He didn't have this entrenchment abroad like Njonjo did. So between the two, Kibaki was a lesser evil, the man from the Republic of Othaya. The Prince of Kabetasha, as Njonjo could famously be referred to, was much more dangerous with political power. So from the word start, the moment they said, on your mark, set, go, on the presidency, Moi knew that the man to watch was who? Charles.
And KANU believed that it was Njonjo who made Kibaki vice president. So Njonjo was looking as if he's the power, eh? So he's the one who told Moi to appoint Kibaki. Because Kibaki looked as if he's easier to remove when the time comes, eh? So you first get rid of the vice president, and then you can
you can come and
you can do something else, eh? And so KANU used to comment, Njonjo just did not understand what he was doing, who he was dealing with, how sharp Kibaki is, eh? So he made a mistake.
Mimi Mwai Kibaki naapa kwamba nitakuwa mwaminifu kwa Rais wa Jamhuri ya Kenya Mheshimiwa Daniel Arap Moi, na nitaitumikia Kenya kwa moyo wangu wote, na kwamba nitaihifadhi, nitailinda na kuitetea katiba ya Kenya kwa mujibu wa sheria iliyowekwa. Ewe Mwenyezi Mungu msaidie.
This trio formed a visible axis of power, often photographed squeezed into a presidential limousine, a portrait of power masking the deep calculations at play behind the tinted glass.
Moi tried to learn as much as he could on what was happening in the country.
Moi was a weak president, very weak. If there is a term stronger than weak in English, just tell me. I will use it. Now, to survive that, he used 2 strategies. One is a strategy of appeasement and populism. AP. Moi went outright to appease the public by certain policies that depicted the previous regime as less populist, full-throat maziwa ya Nyayo, school milk, which came up to my village. I drank it. You didn't, I'm sure. I drank. You drank it? Yeah. I mean, we were shocked. Maziwa milk, maziwa ya Nyayo. Very populist programs, which touched the heart of the common mwananchi. Politics of appeasement. He turned state resources into arms that he could give very easily. Organized women groups, give them money to do this, do that. Started a very ambitious land conservation programs to give him a chance to link with the people and liberate himself from Njonjo and Kibaki. You have seen him lifting heavy stones, gabions, building gabions. And what came out of it as a policy is a very populist approach to development. And the goal was actually to touch the hearts of people. You know, sometimes politics is not touching the mind, it's touching the heart.
He was a very tough leader, a tough African statesman, and very kind. You know, he believed on the principle of carrot and stick. You either toe the line. If you toe the line, you receive good rewards. You reap rewards. You reap benefits. He told me that anybody who plays with me, or anybody who plays with him, would be hit faster than lightning. Yes. Now he changed.
There can never be understanding without love for humanity.
But Moi's true intentions would only be revealed 4 years into his presidency, ignited by a moment that shook his world to its core.
His true character came out after 1982.
On the morning of August 1st, 1982, the nation awoke to chaos. A faction of disgruntled Air Force officers staged a bold coup, seizing control of the capital in a lightning strike on power. For a few tense hours, the fate of Kenya hung in the balance until loyal troops led by Brigadier Mahmoud Mohammed crushed the uprising with brutal efficiency.
That era of 1980s was a tough one because it showed him who his real friends were and who his enemies were.
Yale yaliyotokea leo asubuhi kwa muda mfupi iliyoletea wananchi wasiwasi mwingi.
That day redrew the map of Kenyan politics. Suspected mutineers were hunted down, tortured, and some executed without mercy.
A member of parliament from Kakamega and another one from Kisii, a member of parliament, they wrote letters to General Moringe, who was the head of the armed forces, telling him, please do not forget us. Although they wrote, of course, individually, do not forget us in your new government. Now, when the coup attempt was quashed by the infantry, the letters were already in the post office and they could not retrieve them. So General Moringe brought the letters to Moi. Look at your friends. The member of parliament from Kakamega later collapsed and died. He could not live with the shame. The one from Kisii retreated and kept quiet. He resurfaced after multipartyism. He's still alive, that one, so I don't want to mention his name.
Kwa hivyo nataka nyinyi kuwa watu wenye fikira za kuangalia mbele. Kenya inaenda mbio kwa kila njia.
From that moment, an invisible shroud of fear descended across the land.
1982 coup changed Moi's strategy completely because it rearranged his priorities. Before then, his approach to public life, public affairs was different from after the coup. Because after the coup, he realized that he had enemies within. So he had to try and reorganize the government to his own liking.
That is the time that switched Moi on to become the dictator that in fact tortured me, jailed me, and isolated me, not only from my own compatriots, but even from my own family.
Moi had to become tough.
Moi emerged from the ashes of the coup transformed, hardened, determined. His grip on power would tighten like never before.
These people now, they want to overturn my government. They want to assassinate me. He had, of course, to adopt survival tactics. He became paranoid. Not because he's a coward. It's because he needed to preserve himself. There is no way you can be a good leader if you are dead.
There is a possibility that 1982 was an artificial coup. Artificial in the sense that it could have been deliberately either allowed to happen or made to happen to give a very clear excuse for Moi to stamp his authority, particularly over Kikuyus and Luos.
Kenya was sealed into a one-party state where dissent was no longer just risky, it was deadly.
Well, there were punches here. There were punches, the alignment in the political setup, in the military, in the police here.
He built a fortress of security and intelligence around his role, weaving surveillance into the very fabric of governance. Knowledge became his deadliest weapon.
Moi relied heavily on the intelligence system. At that time, it was called the special branch. Moi relied very heavily on this system to help him make his decisions. First of all, he was a very early riser. Moi would be up at about 5 in the morning, and he would have his very early meetings with his security chiefs from about 5:30, 6 a.m. in the morning. When the rest of the country is now coming in, when other people are coming in, maybe for either cabinet meetings or other sessions which start at 8 or 7:30. By that time, Moi has had his brief with all his security teams.
And he wielded it to ensure not just his survival, but the permanency of his reign.
It is what made Kenya what it could be until the end of the Moi regime.
Moi's suspicions had crystallized into certainty. Shadows within his own circle were plotting betrayal, and he vowed they would not have a second chance.
That is when Moi is reborn. That is now the real Moi. Moi the president.
His resolve was ruthless: eliminate them all and tighten his hold on power.
Of course, he starts by disbanding the military and reforming it. The Air Force was very elitist at the time, and it could only allow those who got up to Form 6 and qualified very well. That's why majority of the Luos ended up in the Air Force up to that point, and the majority of the Kikuyus were in the army.
Na asanti salimia jamii yako na wote.
So he did a patch of both, and then he now brought in the people who had almost nearly 100% loyalty. His own people, a few military officers from Mukambani. That's why he let Mulinge continue. I mean, how do you imagine? Your officers have caused a coup, and your commander-in-chief, you are the technical person of the military, and you are untouched. Does that tell you something? Mulinge knew what happened.
Then that's when Charles Njonjo And Mwai Kibaki pushed through a constitutional amendment to create Section 2A, declaring Kenya to be a one-party what? State. And that party is KANU. End of the story. Nobody objected.
The golden era of now. Kenya one nation, Kenya one people.
Enter the new power players, figures carefully drawn from President Moi's own Kalenjin heartland.
So people saying strange things, he's just watching them from far. And then marking time, each kila mtu na wakati yake.
So he dealt with these people
systematically. So you see the way he dumped Koinange. First of all, he made him minister of some unknown things. From being a minister of state that was very powerful, very close to Kenyatta, they were always together. To now it's environment, look after some animals out there. And so once the Koinange was out of the way, who then should comes in the picture? Njonjo, the one who was showing off as if he's the one in charge. And Njonjo never learned from Moi. Humble yourself.
Nicholas Biwott, the shrewd tactician. Simon Nyachai, an ambitious operator, steadily climbing Moi's inner circle, and Hezekiah Oyugi, the formidable provincial commissioner. Together, they became Moi's hidden arsenal, his instruments in reshaping Kenya's political order. Like Kenyatta before him, Moi wielded the provincial administration not just as a bureaucracy, but as the iron muscle of his regime.
He tightened the control both on the government and the political party. He reorganized KANU political party to give it more power. And it is after 82 that we had the famous committee of 10, the disciplinary committee was brought into KANU.
We say in my language that the best way of hunting is when you hunt like a leopard, not when you hunt like a lion. Tuarabunengo to tuarabunendo. Hunt like a leopard, don't hunt like a lion. You know, a lion roars 10 kilometers away. The victims have heard that this guy is around. A leopard is very still.
By the time
waits, and when it springs, hardly misses. That was Moi.
Pengine mtoto ambaye angeenda mbele anapata vikwazo kwa sababu hakuna pesa, wazazi hawana. Na ndio juzi nikasema certificates ya wale ambao zilikuwa zinasoma katika shule wenyewe wachukue certificates zao.
The stage reached its climax on May 8, 1983. The venue, a fundraising rally in Kisii organized by Simeon Nyachai.
Lazima nyinyi wazazi mujue kwamba kazi yetu ni kujenga.
Imagine the scene. Thousands gathered under the sun, schools crying out for aid.
Kazi yetu ni kuangalia kwamba kila shule ina
anticipation in the air
za kutosha mahitaji ya wanafunzi.
President Moi steps forward, rungu in the hand.
Shule fulani tufanye harambee.
Then in a thunderous declaration he wants, there is someone backed by foreign powers being groomed to sabotage my leadership.
He was not strong on that statement. He said as if it was casual. It was not emphatic.
The message was sharp, but Moi had just made his move in full view of the nation.
As a journalist, I said, this is the news. So I drove to Nakuru with my small typewriter, and then it was the intro. And then the newspapers now, they splashed it.
They splashed it. It became viral.
Yeah, it became viral.
But it laid the foundation for the Msaliti story.
Parliament took over. Then Mwanga said, because Moi did not say who it was. So Mwanga said it is Njonjo.
On the floor of the house?
Yes. Yeah. Now that is how things now began to explode. Yes, I'm the one who wrote the story, 83. That's a small typewriter. Because when he spoke in Kisii, some said, go in Guinea. wanasaidiwa na watu wa nje kuchukua serikali. But you know, it was not emphatic, it was not a warning, it was not a caution. He said it in a very casual manner. It didn't matter. He said it.
So Njonjo, who had looked as if he was a co-president when Moi became president, they were riding together and looking like as if he's the one. He was shown the door,
By 1983, Njonjo had stepped down from the cabinet role and relinquished his Kikuyu MP seat. Moi's memo was straightforward. Observe the consequences of betraying the regime and its leader. That is the way they will end.
Now, with Njonjo out of the way, and with the 1980s becoming increasingly draconian, who was the next target?
Kibaki.
Yes. And at least Kibaki was warned in public.
Don't think.
Don't think. It's not your job. It's a presidential assignment, thinking. You just do what you are told. He said that when I was vice president, I had no mind of my own. So who are you?
Who are you?
Yeah.
Where are you coming from?
And 4 years later, Kibaki was dumped as the vice president and shifted it to Minister of Health, which he did with gusto. Because Kibaki understood Moi. And he tried as much as possible, don't get on the wrong side of this guy.
Meanwhile, Nicholas Biwott emerged from the fallout, his influence stronger than ever. Now, this is how Moi clung to power in the aftermath of the 1982 coup attempt. He tightened his grip through an invisible web of watchers and enforcers. Moving in silence, yet with ruthless precision, Moi unleashed a loyal secret police, many drawn from his inner circle, to seize opponents, lock them away without trial, and bend society to his will through fear.
He moves away from populism to suppression, because the coup had given him a free ticket. Suppress those who have dissent against your regime. Jail them. Put in the laws that speak to that.
That was the law then. I don't think President Moi did anything outside the law in terms of arrests and detentions, because there was a provision in the law that a person shall be detained by the president. It was in the law.
But Moi understood that brute force was never enough. To remind every rival that nowhere was truly safe, he wove an intricate network of informants. In his Kenya, suspicion lived in every shadow. Neighbors, friends, even family could be spies. Trust itself became a rare and dangerous luxury, and yet fear was only half the foundation of his power.
But then Moi was a clever politician. He moderated suppression with corruption. As you see,
Moi mastered the art of temptation. He knew how to exploit human frailty, wielding patronage like a weapon. When intimidation faltered, he offered wealth, titles, and privilege. With calculated generosity, he turned foes into allies, critics into loyal beneficiaries, each coin, each appointment binding them tighter to his rule.
Those who were ready to work with him, he co-opted them. And for the first time, we started now seeing professors experiencing some kind of exodus or exile from university to abroad and from university to public service.
So those who go abroad?
Yeah. Those who are the ones he wanted to suppress. Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Maina wa Kenyatta, Mukarunganga. Those ones, Mukarunganga was in our department of history and archaeology. I'm sure you know that. Then there were those he co-opted. For the first time, a historian became an executive chairman of a bank. We can manage money historians, Dr. Benjamin Kipkorir, from that department. Historians became ambassadors. Professor Ida Salim became Kenya's ambassador to Netherlands. Dr. Salik was gay, although that was not the first. Even earliest, the first Kenya's ambassador to London when we gained independence was a historian, Dr. Josephat Karanja. Historians, we have a way to one evil. Then he co-opted Professor Henry Mwanzi. He's around, still around, moved to KU. Dr. Seka, Eric, you know that? The people who talked very eloquently about Nyayo philosophy. Hello? Dr. Yusuf Nzubo was sent as an ambassador of Kenya. Yeah, he's still around. Sally Koskei. Sally Koskei was taken, sent as an ambassador to London. Later on, became the topmost civil servant.
Moi understood that the key to binding his inner circle was simple. He had to make their fortune so deeply tied to him that no other hand could ever offer them more. He greased the palms of his men, handing them bribes and free rein to be corrupt. Costly, right? But here is the bigger question. Where was the money coming from? The answer lay in Kenya's own wealth. Moi moved to nationalize the country's natural resources, placed his loyalists in charge, and monopolized trade.
But we need to be more cooperative.
He manipulated markets, artificially raising prices, withholding goods to spike demand, slapping on punishing taxes, and watched the money roll in. Through this playbook, Moi and his inner circle amassed fortunes worth billions of shillings. Yet, like any shrewd strongman, Moi understood the power of patronage.
There is only one PS who has worked from State House, and that had to be a historian, Professor William Robert Ochieng. It was Moi's PS from State House. PSs are in ministries, but Ochieng was in State House.
Yes, he plundered the state, but he didn't hoard it all. He spread the spoils, using Kenya's stolen wealth to buy loyalty and keep senior party officials firmly in his corner. He set aside a portion of the looted wealth to appease the common people through things like maziwa ya Nyayo in schools, Harambee contributions, and other gestures. The intention was simple: to make the public believe that all was well, that Moi was indeed a good man. It was a calculated mix of charm and fear. From that moment forward, patriotism in Kenya was redefined. To love the nation meant to love the president. Daniel Arap Moi's image became inescapable, etched on banknotes, gazing from classroom walls, immortalized on murals, and echoing in rhythms of songs. Politicians tripped over themselves to shower him with praises. One minister even declared that trees and maize swayed in harmony to the chant of Nyayo, Nyayo. Kenyan musicians composed ballads in his honor. The devotion reached almost surreal heights. Peter Olo Aringo, with dramatic flourish, once proclaimed, "Your Excellency, even the birds in the sky and the animals on the ground sing your name." But beneath this choreographed adoration lay a darker truth. With a calculated stroke, Moi reshaped the nation's constitution, dismantling political pluralism and forging KANU into a single, unyielding monolith. Power was carefully distributed, an intricate balance between national heavyweights and grassroots enforcers. District KANU chairmen became kingmakers, their influence determining political survival or ruin.
You remember the days of KANU disciplinary committee led by one Honorable Okiki Amayo, which made men, grown men with beard and gray hair, cry like babies.
Alongside him, Mombasa's Sharif Nasir and the Institute Njenga Karume fortified KANU's grip, demanding loyalty and enforcing Moi's order with unmatched zeal.
If KANU wanted, you could not even keep chicken, leave alone a duff or a goat in your home. If KANU wanted. A youth winger was more powerful than a primary school principal. Everything became KANU. KANU maendeleo ya wanawake, youth, KANU this, KANU that. Everything became KANU.
Moi built a covert lattice of elders and informants, men he knew personally, a shadow network binding communities to his will. And for those who dared to dissent, the price was heavy. Suppression was swift, merciless, and often final.
It was a very difficult time. Of course, there were those arrests. If I give my personal experience, I was arrested so many times, I had so many cases. I don't know which part of the country where I had not been taken to court or taken into a prison or a police station.
Between 82 and 88, just before the Murolongo elections, it was SCC. People made money, people made careers out of that process. And then people lost careers, people lost lives.
Many fled into exile. Others vanished without a trace, detained indefinitely or tortured in the dreaded chambers of Nyayo House. Some never lived to tell their story. The murder of Foreign Affairs Minister Robert Ouko in 1990 remains one of the darkest chapters in Kenya's political history, an unresolved riddle that still casts its shadows across the nation. On the morning of February 12th, the country awoke to whispers of mystery. Ouko had vanished from his home in Koru, near Kisumu. 4 days later, on February 16th, the nation recoiled in horror. His charred body was found in Gotalila, barely a mile from his residence. The scene was chilling, almost theatrical. A pistol loaded with a single cartridge lay near his head. Beside it, his Somali sword and walking stick, placed with uncanny precision. A bullet wound pierced just above his right ear. A jerrycan of fuel discarded close by hinted at a desperate attempt to erase him in fire. But the details betrayed the illusion. A polythene bag filled with neatly folded cloth, socks, jeans, a kitenge shirt, a leather jacket holding 4 rounds of ammunition and 450 shillings was found a few meters away. A box of matches allegedly used to set him alight sat conveniently placed as though arranged for investigators to find. His leg was broken, a silent clue suggesting violence beyond the flames. A torch, borrowed from a worker, rested near his remains. Its batteries were dead, incapable of illuminating the shadows of the night when Ouko's life was taken. To calm the storm, President Daniel Arap Moi called upon Britain's Scotland Yard. Investigators pointed fingers at powerful figures, Nicholas Biwott, Moi's close ally and then energy minister, and Hezekiah Oyugi, the president's influential permanent secretary. Both were detained briefly, then quietly released. A judicial commission of inquiry led by Justice Evans Gisheru began its work, but was suddenly disbanded, leaving behind more questions than answers. Those who had dared to pursue the truth, Police Commissioner Philip Kilonzo and Philip Shikuku, the humble herdsman who first stumbled upon Ouko's body, are themselves long gone. their voices silenced. A cover-up so deliberate it could only point to the hand of the state itself. Whispers in the corridors of power placed President Daniel Arap Moi and his trusted lieutenant Nicholas Biwott at the very heart of the conspiracy.
By your decision to nominate me to be the candidate for the president of Kenya on a party ticket.
In a year that shook the very pillars of Moi's rule, tragedy struck again, defying a chilling warning from Cabinet Minister Peter Okondo. Anglican Bishop Alexander Muge set out for Busia. Okondo had vowed he would not return alive. Days later, the prophecy came true. Muge died in a road crash at Tarbo. Yet the nation murmured in disbelief. Many called it no accident, but an assassination in disguise. Moi's once iron grip was slipping. A fearless pro-democracy wave surged forward, strengthened by defectors from his own KANU party. Figures like Kenneth Matiba and Charles Rubia became the new voices of defiance. Criticism against Moi's style of leadership were growing with each passing day, and they were coming from quarters that the then president least expected. A vibrant atmosphere at the institutions of higher learning, especially the University of Nairobi, was at its highest, with both lecturers and student leaders putting their freedoms and life on the line to push for change. Clergymen teamed up with the political class to agitate for the reintroduction of multi-party democracy in Kenya. But the vibrant intellectuals, clergymen and opposing politicians shortly discovered that the ruthless Moi government was eager to answer fire with more fire. Some of them were forced to run and go into exile. Those arrested found themselves at the Nyayo torture chambers and later in court, where they were hurriedly sentenced to imprisonment.
That constitution allowed Moi to make decrees. That constitution allowed him to make pronouncements without certain levels of consultation, as currently provided for in the current constitution. Moi could pronounce your dismissal through radio, and indeed many ministers during his tenure lost their jobs by just hearing it over the radio.
But the clamor for change grew louder as the suppression became more severe. The 1988 Mlolongo elections left a sour egg in the face of KANU and only served to increase the numbers of those that wanted the return of multi-party democracy. The system of voting had literally allowed Moi to handpick members of the 6th Parliament. Something had changed irreversibly. For those agitating for change, there was no rolling back the wheel for change. Religious criticism had just set in, and Moi was facing a new kind of wave for change. On the 5th of October 1986, Reverend Timothy Njoya, then a minister at St. Andrew's PCA Church in Nairobi, fired the first salvo. He called for the change of Kenya's constitution.
More people were saying, if you can see really a long line being declared the loser, and the small line, the short line, being declared the winner, there is really something wrong in our political spectrum. We need to change it so that it is the majority that takes the day.
When Matiba and Charles Rubia declared a bold rally on July 7, 1990, Sabasaba, the regime reacted with force. The rally was banned. Matiba and Rubia were arrested, dragged into detention without trial.
He made it very difficult for anybody to say anything unless you are of course parroting what he had said before, or you are a court poet singing praise to him.
Undeterred, pro-democracy activists poured into the streets of Nairobi, clashing head-on with police. Riots erupted. A brutal crackdown followed. Scores arrested, others beaten, but the resistance only burned brighter. Kenya was caught in the rising tide of multi-party democracy. The world itself was shifting. Eastern Europe broke free from communist chains. Across the globe, democracy was on the march, and Africa was no exception. Kenya felt the tremors. Moi, once described by Jaramogi Oginga Odinga as a giraffe who sees far, could sense what was coming. But even in the storm of change, his survival instincts never failed him. In December 1991, Moi, against the advice of many KANU diehards, rallied the party to repeal Section 2A of the Constitution and allow for the reintroduction of multi-party politics.
Fungue section hiyo, na mnauliza nyinyi nyote kukaa na mimi, tuende barabara yetu tukiwa KANU pamoja.
Moi was a very dominant president, and he literally controlled KANU. People were scared of speaking out fully. So even that conference at Kasarani, people had been choreographed to say that we should remain a one-party state. We knew that people would be saying that, but at some stage Moi was going to turn around, so that the presentation would have been that he, as Moi, has seen the future, has seen that multipartyism, whatever, and he came out and said, I must save you as a country. I know you love me, I know you love KANU, I know you love that, but the world has changed. But
what followed the change of the constitution portrayed Moi as a master of political tactics and a grand schemer.
Now, forward!
As the opposition went on frenzy, celebrating the repealing of Section 2A, Moi started to scheme on how KANU will stay in power beyond the 1992 elections. Riding on the wave of change, the then opposition outfit Ford had turned out to be a huge force that swept the whole country. But Moi's bag of tricks had one more surprise for the opposition.
The special branch was now well aware of the discussions and the divisions that were emerging from Ford. So quite a number of them traveled to the United Kingdom and told Matiba that, this is your chance. And secondly, they told him that, if he did not take his chance, then Mwai Kibaki was going to eclipse him. Matiba was taken in, but not absolutely, until the day when he came back and was received in a way that I don't think a leader has been received in Kenya until the time when Raila also was received.
Every status quo situation, it uses a method that will scatter the opposition. Jaramogi Odinga is slightly older than Kenneth Matiba. So you put into the head of Kenneth Matiba that it is time for Jaramogi Oginga Odinga to go where? Go home. So when he's coming, I'm younger and he's old and he has had his time. He needs to go away. So that's what was done. Kenneth Matiba was given that impression just by some statements. And then when he came, he had a very good reception at the airport, our president. Now, when he saw that reception, every politician, by the way, is moved by the crowd.
The one who came waving.
And then they come waving. They were blackguards, waving him to be the president. The first thing he did when he now landed in Ford was a big quarrel with Jaramogi Odinga. And that trap caused a split in Ford. Then you ended up having Ford Kenya and then you now ended up having fought Asili.
And so Moi and KANU roamed home in 1992 and managed to stay in power until the last gamble at naming a successor in 2002. The man once hailed as Kenya's professor of politics left quietly, his legacy a paradox. Brilliance and blunders, endurance and excesses, forever etched into history. My name is Enoch Sikolia, and I am the Kenyan historian.
Nitakuwa mwaminifu kwa Jamhuri ya Kenya na kuitumikia kwa moyo wangu wote, na kwamba nitahifadhi, nitalinda na kuitetea katiba ya Kenya kwa mujibu wa sheria iliyowekwa. Ewe Mwenyezi Mungu nisaidie.